Luke, I want to dive into a post. First, I have to say I love your Instagram post. So if you're not following Luke, go follow him on Instagram. We'll probably mention it at the end. But you did a post on the ROI, so the return on investment pyramid on muscle growth. And then you had 3 categories: high importance, moderate importance, and low importance. So I want to just jump through because that's my goal. I'm not sure if it's your goal, but it's most people's goal in the gym. And if it's not, change it to to building muscle or getting stronger. Change it from burning calories to building muscle, a good metric. But I want to dive into the high importance stuff first, so the stuff that means the most in terms of muscle building, and then potentially the stuff where it lowers the importance. So exercise selection is right up there for you. So with so many options of exercises to do, there's so many, right? Just for chest, you can do bench press, you can do chest press machine, you can do dumbbells, you can do push-ups. How do you know if an exercise is good for you?
Yeah. Well, the reason I put exercise selection has been pretty high importance here is because, like, if you want to grow your chest, you got to choose an exercise that actually trains your pecs, right? So that's the main reason I put that as pretty high. I think that probably some people at the moment in the TikTok world and stuff probably overcomplicate exercise selection a bit, but it is something that you kind of got to think a little bit about. And then once you got some solid exercises, I think that gives you a really good base to go from. But I mean, the first thing is really, does it align with your primary goal? Which sounds kind of stupid when you put it that way, but honestly, I think sometimes people get a little bit lost in like, oh, this person's doing that exercise, maybe I should do this exercise and stuff. And really, you just got to think about, well, you know, if I'm training for something specific, I got to have exercises that align with that specific goal. If I'm trying to get stronger at something, then you must adhere to the principle of specificity, and you have to choose an exercise that matches that. So if you're a powerlifter, obviously, like probably at least half of your training volume should be in some variation of the 3 power lifts, as an example. If you're playing a sport on the side, you've got to think about that as well. What exercises am I going to choose there? For muscle growth, it's less about the specific movement and more about just trying to deliver mechanical tension and total work to the target muscles. And that's where you can start to get some generally good exercises. Like, you know, you give anybody a bench press, they're going to grow some chest muscles. But we're also thinking about stuff that's like, you know, what's time efficient, what's going to be suitable for the individual. So, you know, it's not so much about the specific movement, but it's more like what matches the person and their goals. And the first thing I think about when I'm trying to categorize like what might be a good exercise for me is just asking if it's stable enough and if it's highly loadable, because that then allows us to adhere to the principle of progressive overload. You know, if you can push hard without losing your balance, if you can do it without thinking too much about like cues in your head, if you've got like 5 or 6 different cues in your head to try and keep this exercise stable and the reps consistent, that's going to be a problem. So those things all become really important because you don't want coordination and instability to be a limiting factor for you. So if I have, let's say there's a new weird exercise that's popped up on TikTok or Instagram or something, and I want to evaluate this sort of unconventional exercise, I ask myself, like, could I potentially test my 1 rep max on this? If I could test a 1 rep max on it, then it gives me a good idea that, you know, it's probably okay. If you picture trying to do a 1 rep max on an exercise and it's like, shit, that could be like pretty dicey, it's maybe giving you a clue that there's something not so good about the stability demands or the setup or whatever it is. So that's a big thing for me, and I think that's probably where things like machines and support in general is pretty helpful. And again, that's not to say that free weights are not as good as machines or anything like that. Free weights are generally stable enough, but it's just something to sort of think about. And then from there, you can start to think about whether an exercise actually suits your biomechanics as well. So everybody's got slightly different structures, and the classic example is like if you've got really long femurs and you try and do a back squat, that's probably going to turn into a little bit more of a hip dominant movement. So you might be choosing a back squat to try and train your quads, but if you're having to bend over a lot to complete a full range of motion squat, it's probably going to turn more into a hip or lower back exercise. Whereas if you have shorter femurs, you're able to stay more upright. That could be an absolutely killer quad exercise. So, a general squat pattern, generally very good for quads, but maybe a different variation of the squat pattern is better for you if you have longer legs or longer femurs compared to somebody else. So that's something else that we got to think about as well. And that kind of ties into also what sort of range of motion can you achieve with something. Again, like let's use a squat as an example. If you have a really deep hip socket, you might find that as you squat down, your femur just sort of bashes into the front of your hip joint earlier than someone else, and you can't get as deep. Whereas if you choose a different variation, maybe you can avoid that, and that might be a better exercise for you to do squats. So those are all the things that I start to think about when I'm assessing something for me personally. And then you can sort of start to go along with things like, how does it fit into the rest of my program? Does this exercise complement the other movements I'm doing for this body part? Am I familiar enough with this movement to actually train hard on it, or is it going to take me a while to kind of build up the coordination to start pushing hard? Those sorts of things too. So those are all the things I think about.
Do you think about the term that RP Strength have popularized, the stimulus to fatigue ratio? Because you've touched on it, like, mostly, just you haven't said the phrase, let's say. Like, you've talked about, like, if it feels good for you, if it feels for your biomechanics, if it feels great for you, and if it fits your goal. But the stimulus to fatigue ratio is more so like when you do it, is the muscle building stimulus that you feel, like how much it's hitting the target muscle, does that trump how much it may potentially, impact your joints or make you feel discomfort?
Yeah, I think it's a little more complex than just saying, like, is it fatiguing or not? Like, is it giving me a good stimulus or not? Because you kind of got to think, again, with a compound movement, one of the reasons we do it is because one exercise can cover like 2 or 3 muscle groups. If you squat, you can get great glute stimulus, you can get great adductor, great quad stimulus, even a little bit of lower back and core from the isometric contraction. Whereas if you're on a leg extension, it's just training your quads, right? So, yes, okay, a squat is more fatiguing, but it's more fatiguing because you're using way more muscle and it's way more time efficient. You're getting like 3 in 1. So it gets a little bit more complex than just saying, well, this is a higher or low stimulus to fatigue ratio. I do think a bit about, like, what muscles am I trying to train here, and is this exercise actually allowing me to stimulate those muscles well? So again, if we're doing a squat, and I have some clients who specifically like, hey, I really want to build, say, my glutes, I could say, yeah, okay, a squat is an amazing glute exercise, but if it's giving them additional fatigue on their quads that they don't really care about having big quads, then I start to think, well, maybe it's not the best exercise for them. Maybe I should be doing things like hip thrusts or Romanian deadlifts a bit more, because the stimulus to fatigue ratio for that person is better. So yeah, I do think it's like the concept is really sound, but sometimes I think the application is a little bit too one-dimensional.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because if you just keep using that as a guide, then all you'll be doing is chest flies, leg extension, calf raises.
Yeah, exactly.
And you'll just be Mr. Isolation, and then you won't get that bang for buck effect that you get with squats. So that's a really great point. And, like, once again, because it is more fatiguing and it does recruit more muscle fiber, even though that is seen as a downside, I think, not only does it train a lot of muscle groups, but it also has a greater ripple effect onto other exercises, which I really like. Like with the leg extension, you're not necessarily going to get a stronger leg press or a stronger lunge or a stronger split squat, where with a squat, it's, obviously they're completely different exercises, but you're going to get, I believe, more carryover because you're actually building more strength within that exercise, even though the stimulus to fatigue ratio is higher.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think about with hypertrophy training in general, is that it is a bit more flexible than other kinds of training in terms of, like, the principle of specificity. Like I mentioned before, like, if you want to get better at a back squat, you've got a back squat. But if you want to grow your quads, you can use a squat pattern, and they could all be, like, reasonably justifiable. But there is that secondary sort of point that you said of, what other physical qualities do I want to build? For me personally, I care about growing muscle, but I also care about getting stronger. So for me, I'm going to choose something where I can build my squat pattern strength well, and it's also going to give me the hypertrophy that I want. And I think probably most people are like that as well. So it is worth thinking about that stuff too. So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think the exercise selection thing is also important to note. Or if you don't have an understanding, I think it's important to have that understanding of what squat patterns are or what horizontal pushes are, horizontal pulls, vertical push, vertical pull.
Yes.
Because as trainers, we talk about that day and night, and we can pull out all the examples in the world. But when you're writing your own program or have less of an understanding of what these exercises are, then that's when you fall into the trap of just looking at exercises as what they are and not for, let's say, what they represent. So I don't think we should dive into that because it's a pretty, if you don't know what it is, go search up, vertical push-pull, horizontal push-pull, quad dominant, hip dominant, lunge pattern, squat pattern, etc. And that will kind of start giving you a bit of x-ray vision into exercise selection. So you're not just seeing, leg extension equals quads and chest press equals chest. It's more so, chest press machine equals horizontal push machine, and then you can insert any other exercise in there if you don't have the gym equipment, etc. The second thing in high importance was proximity to failure. So the question I had on that, and obviously the kind of underlying thing is if you are trying to build muscle, you have to train within close proximity to failure. And I think on the post you said within like 0 to 4 reps in reserve, or maybe 1 to 4, something like that. But one thing that I think we know is that a lot of people's idea of their reps in reserve is completely different to what their physiology is actually saying. And that's generally just what you get over time. So how do you reset people's reps in reserve perspective as it slowly gets further from failure, which I found it naturally does?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a programming thing as well. Is like, if you really want to be accurate with your reps in reserve, you're better off programming lower reps, as an example. If you're doing sets of 20, although you can grow muscle equally well from sets of 20 to sets of 8 or 10, it's much harder to judge your reps in reserve. So that's definitely one thing that's come up in the literature. Interestingly, a lot of people on my Instagram, I often get comments like saying that, well, I always just train to failure on everything because, people are so bad at judging their reps in reserve. And I don't agree with that because I think with experience, you can get pretty good at judging reps in reserve, and the literature also has tested this, and most people are within like 0.9 RIR of what they predict. So like they'll be 1 rep off. So if they think they've gone to 1 RIR, they've gone to maybe 2 RIR. And that's not a significant enough difference, in my opinion, to really make much of a difference. So people can be pretty accurate with it. But as you say, you kind of do need to hone that skill. And like the easiest way to do it is really just to test your estimated RPE against true failure. So do go to failure sometimes because it gives you a reference point. You understand how it feels for that movement pattern, for that rep range. And the way that they typically do it in the literature and what I do in my coaching sometimes is you do the set until let's say your set is prescribed at an RPE of 8 or an RIR of 2, like the same thing. So you've got 2 reps. You judge that you're 2 reps away from complete failure. So you basically call that out when you think you've reached it. And then you just keep going until you hit failure and you see how close you were. And that can give you a really good way of starting to see, okay, I always underestimate by 2 reps or whatever. So you can start to understand that. Something that I've also done in the past is actually to implement a volume block, or like a low volume failure block. So you basically just program everything to failure and you make sure that you do relatively low volume so you don't completely cook yourself. And it just gives you the opportunity to just go balls to the wall every single time on every single set. You can see how much you get a drop off from set to set. You can see how it feels when you're fatigued versus when you're fresh, all of those different things. Sometimes I do this using rest pause sets. So if anyone doesn't know, a rest pause set is basically where you take the set all the way to failure or very close. Usually I just go all the way to failure. You rest like 20, 30 seconds. So you have an incomplete rest period and then you just go to failure again. It's a really time efficient way of accumulating training volume. And then you're going to failure every single set. So you're just constantly like seeing what it feels like and how it looks as you get close to failure. So those things help a lot. And I also think something that helps a lot because I coach remotely is to video yourself. Sometimes I get clients being like, I'm not sure if I'm close to failure or not. I'm like, well, film yourself, send me the video, but even just filming themselves, they can watch and they'd be like, oh, this felt a lot harder than it looked or whatever. Like every rep is exactly the same speed and I thought I was like really close to failure. Okay, so that gives you an idea. So all of those things I think help quite a lot, but it then just takes time, but it won't take that long. Like I think a few months of doing something like that, or once you've had a year or two under your belt of genuinely using RIR, I think you can be pretty accurate with it.
Do you think you should program differently if you are doing that programming block that's all the way to failure? Because one thing I found with, actually, so like 4 weeks ago, I think I herniated a disc or had a lower back muscle spasm when I was doing RDLs. It was my fault. I was being an idiot. I didn't warm up as fast as I usually did, and I was getting too cocky. I was like, I hadn't done RDL in a while, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll just do 60 for a few reps, 100 for a few reps. I put on 130, and then like the first 2 reps felt pretty shit, to be honest. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll just adjust my technique as I go. And then I got the whole like convulsion thing and dropped to my knee.
Yeah, sick.
Yeah,
love that.
It was terrible, man. But like even before that happened, I like programming close to failure, and I've actually become more of a fan of failure as time has gone on, because I think what I've found is that people actually, and this is probably just my experience, because with your research that you said, people do have a good idea of where it is. Maybe it's just the people that I am training, or a handful of people that I'm training that are struggling with it, are a bit too inexperienced to have that grasp on where true failure is. Because I see the sets, I'm like, mate, you had like 5 left, and you're like, at the end. But even though I will train to failure a lot, I will still keep at least 1 rep in reserve for the big compounds like bench, overhead press, deadlifts and things like that. More so for safety out of anything, because it's just not worth it for me. So I program slightly differently, but I was just wondering how you program when you are going for failure.
Oh, definitely. I mean, again, are you going to do a back squat to failure? Like, that might happen once in a blue moon in someone's like entire lifting career, if you want to call it a career or whatever. So, no, I mean, I agree with that. And I think that comes back to what I said before about having exercises that are stable. Like, it just allows you to not think so much about the technique. You can stay safer. You can just kind of go, like, I mean, if you put the average person on a leg press, you can kind of just be like, yeah, just push, just push till your legs give out, really, like it's fine. Whereas with a squat, you got to try and keep them maintaining technique, bracing, all of this stuff a lot more. So I do think it changes how you program for sure. And I personally tend to program compounds like that too. Yeah, like 2 reps in reserve, like maybe 1 rep in reserve. But I think something that I've noticed is a lot of people seem to think that like a 2 or a 3 RIR set is like not that hard or whatever. A genuine 2 or 3 RIR is like really hard, on a big compound. It's genuinely a tough set. So I kind of agree with you that probably those studies used people who were really into their training and they like training hard. So it doesn't necessarily carry across to your average person in the gym. And I would rather that someone goes a little bit too hard on a set than too easy. Like the sort of risk of going too easy, if you want to put it that way, is greater than the risk of like, oh, I accidentally went a little bit too close to failure. Like, that's a good thing, you know what I mean? And if it means you're too cooked to do another set, like, I think that's okay, because you're learning how to push yourself close to failure.
Yeah, I think, I agree. And the biggest reason I think people, like, the average person in the commercial gym doesn't actually see the progress that they want is because they don't train hard enough. I think that's basically the biggest factor. And, I spent, I started off in Sydney at Fitness First Market Street, so I was training a lot of people in the heart of Sydney, Commonwealth Bank, PwC, and neighbouring businesses, and they know how to go hard in their career, but in the gym, they're not necessarily coordinated enough, or they don't really know how to get into those gears. And it's not like you're just too much of a pussy to train hard. It's more so that like they want to work hard, but they just don't know what it looks like and feels like, and they usually just need that encouragement. I agree. On the third, also in high importance, you had volume, and you're mainly talking about effective sets. Yeah. How do you classify an effective set? And then secondly, I have another question. A lot of people will say, I just go to failure on the last set. so many people train like that.
Hmm.
And what's your thoughts on that style of training or that method of using your sets like that?
Yeah. Well, an effective set for me, basically, if you really strip it down, it's basically a set that provides enough mechanical tension and physiological stress to force the body to adapt and grow. So if we classify it like that, there's no magical RIR you have to reach. It basically just needs to be hard enough to force an adaptation. But equally, not every rep you perform actually contributes to the training goal equally. So warm-up sets obviously don't count as effective volume because the tension is just too low to stimulate an adaptation. So we have a threshold of intensity and proximity to failure that is going to move the needle for us, really. And generally this means that, to give a very non-specific answer, the reps have to be challenging. Now, if you look at some of the science, there isn't a lot of difference in hypertrophy from my reading between going all the way to failure and stopping a bit short of failure. So I think it comes down a little bit more to how much total effective volume you're actually performing over a session. So let's say you had 3 sets of bench press or whatever, and you go to failure on every single set. Well, you're tired then. You're very tired from the first set, which then bleeds over into yes, you're still going to failure on the second set, but you're performing less overall volume that could contribute to your strength and your muscle growth. And the same thing for the third set. Whereas if you were to do those 3 sets where you still go very close to failure, let's say you keep 2 reps in reserve in the first 2 sets, and then you go to failure in the last set, it means that the overall volume over those 3 sets, the overall effective volume, is potentially a little bit higher. So I think that can explain the difference, and I think in some cases that's actually then a smart move to accumulate in more volume load, more effective volume. So I quite like that approach of saving failure for the last set. I don't necessarily think it has to apply to every exercise, because for isolation exercises, kind of just going to failure, I don't think it significantly impacts your overall volume. And especially if you're doing something like, you've already done some squats and now you're going to sit on a leg extension, I kind of just kind of bro out on that,
Yeah.
Strap yourself in and just go for it. Yeah, I think that's totally fine. Whereas if I'm going to do something like a squat or a leg press or something like that, then I might be a bit more strategic, because it is a compound movement. It's going to generate more overall fatigue in the entire body, more metabolic stress and that kind of stuff. So yeah, okay, then I might do a couple of sets of, 2 or 3 RIR and then get as close to failure as I realistically can on the last set. And I get more overall volume that way. So that's probably what I quite like to do. But yeah, it's a bit exercise specific, and there is a psychology aspect to it as well. I think that mentality of getting after it on a, let's say, a single joint movement or a very stable movement, there's a lot to be said for that, I reckon. I think it just gives you a sense of momentum in your training. It gives you a sense of almost pride that you've done it. And, it obviously trains your ability to feel when you're close to failure and all that sort of stuff. So I think there's value beyond just the physiological stimulus to the muscle as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only thing that you have to be aware of when you're doing those first 2 sets that are shy of failure is that they are truly within that 2 to 3 reps in reserve that you're talking about. And like you were saying, 2 to 3 reps in reserve is still hard. And I think, coming back to the TikTok bro social media, people, from what I see, are almost just doing warm-up sets and then just doing 1 set where they're just going Tom Platz, where they need to really be almost going that, just stopping 1 shy and then going all the way toward the end. So we've covered high importance. Now this is moderate importance, and you've put rest periods here. How long is long enough for a rest period?
Well, the simple answer is rest until you feel ready to perform your best on the next set. So I put it here at medium importance because how much you rest is a little bit arbitrary. It kind of doesn't matter. It's more that if you don't rest long enough, it's going to be difficult for you to accumulate enough volume. And like we've been speaking about, you might burn out before you've gotten enough volume to really drive your your progress. When I wrote this, I was thinking about a lot of my clients. Actually, I worked at Wynyard when I first started as well, so like I know the exact clientele that you're talking about at Market Street. But you know, you see a lot of people who would judge the effectiveness of their workout by like how much it got their heart rate up, how much they were sweating, and how sort of fatigued they felt, if that makes sense. And for a lot of people, I think they're so used to training with short rest periods, whether they've done aerobics before, whether they've played footy before and it's about your fitness or whatever it is, they just sort of conflate the difficulty that they feel cardiovascularly with how effective the workout is. And, you know, for them to stand around for 2 minutes in between sets feels like I'm not doing enough here, like the tempo of my workout's dropping, and they get like this real anxiety over it. But to accumulate enough high quality work, that's kind of what you got to do, you know. So that's why I put it there. I mean, the main thing is really just like if you're resting an appropriate amount of time, you just got to look for your performance from set to set. If you're leaving 1 or 2 reps in reserve, generally speaking, your performance should drop between 5 to 15% from set to set. That's like a pretty normal drop off for most exercises. So like, let's say you hit 10 reps on your first set, you should still get like 9 on your second set, maybe 8, and then that's appropriate. That's totally fine. So that's probably what I aim for. Now, if you look at the literature, if you have self-selected rest, where you just kind of rest until you feel like you're ready, that seems to perform just as well as if you were actually timing your rest periods. But most people rest longer than what they actually need to.
If it's
there was a study that literally just came out. Yeah, if it's self-selected, I think they rested 3 minutes and 40 seconds or something, whereas like the timed people who were doing 2 minutes got the same performance. So the workout basically took twice as long for the people who self-selected their rest periods. And I see that a lot with like being on your phone in between sets. Real easy for 5 minutes to go by. You lose your focus. Your workout takes way longer. So...
I think Brad Schoenfeld posted that today. I think it was like, the same outcomes, the same like level of perceived exertion, but it took 27% longer or something. So basically, you know, an hour and a half workout could be 1 hour if you just time your workouts. And this is why I'm a big believer in. So I love antagonistic supersets, where you're doing, you know, opposite pushes and pulls or uppers and lowers. I think that that's a bit of a hack because, personally, I think when you get to a level of strength, you need time. And look, I'm not trying to say that I'm very strong, but if I'm like resting 90 seconds to 2 minutes in between like a dumbbell chest press where you're dealing with 50s, I can't go again in 90 seconds to 2 minutes. But I find if I'm going to do that for 6 to 8 reps, dealing with heavy dumbbells, and then I'll go and do some weighted chin-ups and then come back, you know, I've had about, 4 to 5 minutes rest. I'll rest, I'll do my set, take 2 minutes, do that set, take another 2 minutes, maybe that's 5 minutes, and I come back guns blazing. You're obviously almost doubling your work capacity. Well, not doubling because you still got to, take time to do the other exercise. But the main thing that I'm happy with is that my performance isn't dropping.
Exactly.
Instead of just doing straight sets where I'd rest 2 minutes, but I would do, 8 reps, 6 reps, 2 reps. So I'm a huge fan of that.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, look, I've coached some pretty strong people, like powerlifters doing a hypertrophy block, and it's just like, dude, they're lifting so much load. The systemic stress, if you're doing like, 180 kilo RDLs, it's just like, he's going to need more than 2.5 minutes between this, like, so. Yeah, for sure. For moderate importance, you also put range of motion. And I love range of motion. Like, I've been a full range of motion shill since I started, just because I believe if you're going to train, you may as well do it to the biggest full range of motion possible that you can, because not only does it make you stronger in that entire range of motion, it's going to help you potentially increase your range of motion if you have low mobility, and then if you continue to kind of like try to challenge that, then it may increase it, which is weights is kind of like loaded stretching, we've heard that before. But one thing I did want to ask is, like, when would you potentially not recommend full range of motion? Because there has been a lot of emergence around length and partials and, like, what's the most important part of the rep.
And now I think the shortened position, people are almost like trying to avoid it now, which I think sucks. But I'd just love to know, like, because, obviously we can just say, do as much range of motion as possible. But I think an interesting question is when potentially maybe wouldn't we use full range of motion?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I want to say about range of motion is it's actually arbitrary what range of motion we use for an exercise. We're not using our full possible range of motion that a joint is capable of on most exercises. It's arbitrary. As an example, with a bench press, you're lowering it until the bar touches your chest usually, and we consider that full range of motion. But physically, you could probably go further if you took the bar away or whatever. Is that worth doing or not? I don't know. So that's just bear in mind that a lot of our conventions and conceptions of what good form or good range of motion looks like for every exercise is very much informed by received wisdom and what kind of looks right or whatever, but it's kind of arbitrary from a physiological, biomechanical point of view.
It's kind of limited to the equipment that you're using almost.
Yeah,
100%. Like you go as deep as the bar hits your chest, the dumbbells hit your shoulders, or...
Exactly. Yeah. It's just not practical to do it any other way. So for me, it's like... Yes, a full active range of motion is something that we're striving for, but it's also one of these things where, adequate range of motion is really what we're after, not necessarily like it has to be full range of motion all the time. And I think people with the length and partial idea and the full ROM sort of thing, I have seen it a little bit on RP where like some of the guys who like I think Dr. Mike and them, like he's got a really big range of motion when it comes to leg pressing, for example, where they kind of like knees are touching the chest and it's really deep. If I do that, I am in serious pain with my lower back for a while after that. Like my anatomy just doesn't suit that. And I think a lot of people are trying to copy this where they're like trying to get as deep as they can, or they're doing those bicep variations where it's like, you look like you're being freaking strung up from the ceiling sort of thing. And, my shoulders would kill me if I did that. So it's going to be a bit different for different people, and full range of motion doesn't have to go like so extreme. But some stuff that I think about is that sometimes there's a mismatched strength and resistance profile. So if you think about where the muscles are strongest throughout the range of motion of a joint, that's the strength profile. Like where is the muscle strong naturally? And then when you take that over to like a machine or something, the resistance profile is where does the machine make it hardest? And sometimes those things are mismatched. So in certain exercises, your muscles are, for example, much stronger in the stretched position. A calf raise is a perfect example. And so some people think that, hey, a good calf raise rep is only one where you can get right up onto the top of your toes, and anything less than that is not a good rep because it's not full range of motion. But the calves structurally are just sort of, if you want to use the word designed, to be much stronger when they're in that sort of more stretched position because they reach active insufficiency when they go up too high. Like basically the muscle fibers cross over too much to actively generate enough force. So if you stick strictly to full range of motion, then the weight you can use is probably going to be like half of what you can actually use for a calf raise. And so you would be completely killing your potential calf gains by doing that. Another one actually that I see a lot of, strangely enough, is the seated hip abduction. So like when you have your knees together and you push outwards. So a lot of my female clients like to use that because they want to build glutes and the shape around their hips like that. And that's just got a similar sort of strength profile. So again, you could do heavy like sort of lengthened partials on that, and it actually suits the anatomy of the muscle really, really well. So I think it's a little bit sort of muscle and exercise specific sometimes. Like generally speaking, I'm aiming for a full range of motion, but again, it's got to suit your anatomy. It's got to suit the actual exercise and what you're trying to do. And then there are some things where, like if you're an athlete, doing a quarter or a half squat actually matches the joint angles that you use in running and jumping much better than like a full range squat. So you'll still get some hypertrophy out of it. It may not be like quite as much as if you were doing an ass to grass squat, but it may still be worth putting in because you're getting some hypertrophy and you're getting some sport specificity, and you're able to use a bit more load as a result of that. So it's not really a one size fits all as far as I'm concerned, but yeah, generally speaking, like reasonable range of motion with everything is probably a good idea.
Yeah, I think the thing that I struggle with that concept is the standardization of a rep, which I'm quite big on, because if you're doing length and partials or reps that are somewhere in between, it's very grey. And I like boxes to be ticked and I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed. So, and that's just how I am, and that's generally how I coach. And especially if people come into fitness with obviously less of an understanding than us, it's hard for them to gauge if they're actually doing a rep or not. And often they'll give themselves, the benefit of the doubt and be like, yeah, that was 10 reps. And then I'd look at it and be like, mate, that was 2 push-ups and the rest were just nothing. But so, I was talking to Menno about this, and, one thing that I use for length and partials is I usually reserve it for the final set, and I'll just encourage full range of motion, like obviously just program full range of motion. Let's say it's 3 sets, so they will do that. And then if it's calf raises on that last set, I'll put like length and partials on the final set, and then they'll do that. But then once again, if you're doing that for every set, maybe you're going to get better hypertrophy gains than if you, were just doing it on the last set like I would program. So it's hard to say. And once again, it comes back down to the individual, because personally, when I do length and partials, that it cooks me a bit. So I can't really do it every set. Because I just burn out, and then I'm like, mate, I can't even. I'll do 1 set, and then I'll have to move on, because then I'm just going to be fluffing around, probably doing junk volume because I'm too sore, or I'll be too in the hole for recovery. So what's your thoughts?
No, I agree. I agree with you, mate. I think it's got to be deployed strategically, because as you say, you could be hurting the total amount of volume, you could be hurting your recovery if you're doing heavy length and partials on everything. So I agree, save it for the exercises or the situations, like maybe the odd set where it's really worth doing. Something like a calf raise, for example, for me, I don't care if I do length and partials on every set of that, because I'm doing 3 sets of calf raises at the end of the odd session. I'm not doing a huge amount of volume on that. It's fine. But certainly if I was trying to do it on squats or something like that, it's just going to be pretty rough, or leg presses or whatever it is. So, I do agree with that. But on your point of standardization, I think something that's probably really underlooked, and I probably should have even put it on this post, maybe the next time I recycle this post I'll put it on, is logbooking. Being able to actually track your progress and seeing what you did last time and seeing if you can beat it, or having an understanding of whether the amount of volume you're doing is maybe too high, or something you're not recovering well enough to really have your progress go up over time, your performance go up over time. And when you use a length and partial, it does get more challenging to kind of log that, like how do you standardize the reps, that sort of stuff. So I do think that if you have some sort of marker for when, like where your length and partial rep should end, then that helps a lot. Like it's arbitrary again, just like full range of motion is arbitrary. But if you say, okay, with the calf raise, if I can come halfway up, if I see the weight stack go over this sort of marker on the machine or whatever, that counts as a rep. Something like that can help a bit.
Yeah, and that's where taking notes and tracking in an app or writing down your workouts plays a massive role. I agree. I just really like rep standardization to really be clear on progressive overload. Like, pendlay rows, I want them to hit the floor and also hit my sternum. I want tricep dips. Like, I know when I do a dip here at the gym that I train at, my nose needs to touch the bar where my hands are. So that's my range of motion. But obviously everyone's anatomy is different too, because I've tried people to do that and they can't do it. Like, it hurts their shoulders. So it doesn't make sense. But I still like to try to empower people with a standard, because I think it's more empowering than disempowering. Because if you're, like that example before, if you think you're doing 10 push-ups and then I go, no, that was 2, that's actually disempowering, because you didn't have that knowledge of what the standard was. The next thing is rep range. So, what we've learned over the last few years, or really popularized, is like you can build muscle from 1 to 30 reps. So it doesn't really matter. Just train hard. That's the kind of, main thing that everyone's saying. But I want to know what thought process you go through in terms of actually selecting what number, because I find that that's quite unhelpful. It's kind of like just saying, oh, you need to create a calorie deficit. Just eat less and move more, because if you have no knowledge of what rep range you're actually doing, 1 to 30 is actually more confusing than anything. Like, I would rather 8 to 12. Just give me 8 to 12. I can stick with that. It's much easier. So how do you determine what rep range to use for workouts? What's your thought process?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is coming back to the goal. If someone is looking to also have like a secondary strength goal, if they tell me like, hey, I, play this sport on the weekend and maybe that would benefit from being a bit, stronger or something like that, then I'm automatically thinking, well, how our hypertrophy work can be in the lower rep range. Because then you get a bit of strength gains and the hypertrophy. And it's like sweet as. If they are a little bit more sort of the person I described before, where they're quite used to doing higher reps and they like thrive off of like, I need to feel my heart rate go up, I might go, look, initially I might use higher reps with that person and then slowly bring them to lower reps where they can build probably where they have a bit of a deficit, just because I know that the sort of engagement and the enjoyment with the program is going to be really, really valuable. And once I've built that trust, then I can maybe introduce them to a phase where I'm going like, hey, there's some exercises in here where we're doing 6 to 8 reps and we're going to have to rest 2.5 minutes in between or something. So I think it comes down to sort of preferences in the individual context in that sense. But generally speaking, I am in favor of slightly lower rep ranges or like moderate rep ranges because it's easier to track RIR. You get better strength gains out of it. It's easier to see progress from week to week, or maybe you're not progressing week to week, but let's say over the months. It's easier to add a little bit of extra weight if you're doing a lower rep range, add an extra rep if you're doing a lower rep range. So I think about that quite a lot, and I think the emerging evidence now is that actually you can build muscle on, I think I said in that post like 5 to 25 or something, but I think there is emerging evidence that you potentially lower than that as well, which is pretty cool. So certainly I'm on the lower side of that, but I think also the variety sometimes helps a bit. Obviously the exercise you're using, that helps a bit. I might have a broader rep range for something like if you're doing a cable lateral raise, it's not so easy to put the weight up. So then I might say, okay, instead of prescribing 8 to 10 reps on this, I might say, look, 8 to 12 is good. So work your way up, use the double progression method where you work your way up from 8 reps to 12 reps over time, then put the weight up and see if you can do 8 reps with that. Whereas with a squat or a leg press, I'm more inclined to just say, look, do 6 to 8, because that's just a bit more appropriate to the exercise. You're using a lot of muscle. It's more of a sort of, mentally it sort of seems to categorize more as a strength movement. So that seems to work for a lot of people. That's kind of where I'm at with the rep ranges. Like generally speaking, if I could do everything kind of in the lower to like low moderate rep range, I think generally speaking that kind of catches the most situations, most contexts pretty well, but obviously there's lots of situations where you might go higher rep as well. Yeah,
I agree. I prefer the lower rep range too, and I found most people actually do as well. They kind of... I think it just feels better, doing higher reps is just, it's fatiguing, and it's like...
It's uncomfortable, it sucks.
It's genuinely less enjoyable, and for people that obviously don't enjoy it or go into the gym or struggle to make time for it, you don't want to be like, all right, here's 15 reps on the leg extension, you know what I mean? It's like your quads are
you're going to feel like you're going to throw up.
No one really wants to see that. No. But I guess one reason that I have I would program higher reps and I think you would too is, so recently I actually broke my pinky toe. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and it was literally sticking out the other way. It was very painful. So I've been having to cause it would hurt to dorsiflex my foot and point up. It's fine now because it's 4 weeks after, but originally it basically just had to stay straight the entire time. So my leg training was very minimal. I still trained because I believe in training around injuries, and still keeping it going. So I was doing 45-degree back extension. I was doing, but also I couldn't dorsiflex my foot too hard, so I couldn't really have too much weight to kind of dig into the ground. Yeah. And same thing with that leg extension and leg curl, because if you go really hard on leg curl or leg extension, you kind of flex your toes up. So I had to do shitty 15 to 20 reps. So I think that, in rehabilitation and in injuries, or let's say lack of equipment, it's a very good tool to play around with. You can do 40 push-ups, instead of doing 10 reps on the chest press machine. But other than that, I do really struggle to find reasons to do higher rep ranges.
Yeah. I mean, I generally agree with that, man. Obviously, injuries is another good one, for sure. I do find, though, sometimes the mentality with... I mean, obviously, your injury is a bit different, but if you have something that's, your typical rehab exercises, where people start out with bands and, you know, do 30 reps of this, do a 60-second set or whatever. A lot of people, like, they almost stay in that mentality and they never really provide the tissue with enough stimulus to get stronger and more capable again. Yeah. So it can be a bit of a mental trap sometimes where you're feeling a burn, but it's not actually really doing anything to, like, stimulate you properly.
Yeah, I think so too. I actually had that because, like, 2 weeks before that, like I said, I herniated a disc and I had to do like cobras for my rehab. So I had to lie down to kind of, like, my physio was saying, it actually kind of helps to, like, put if it is a herniation of the disc, it kind of helps to, like, put it back in place. And then from there, it progressed to, like, body weight, back extensions, you know, with a rounded back because extension didn't feel very good. So I was kind of doing the more hip dominant one. And then now I'm adding weight. And it's like, what I'm doing is slowly making that tissue stronger and stronger, as opposed to just doing cobras and, you know, just doing that for the rest of my life. And then my lower back just being so weak as soon as I do another RDL, it just kind of, my disc just slips out again. So we're at low importance. So training frequency, and obviously this isn't saying that it's not important. I think it's important to clarify that. And it's not like training frequency doesn't matter, but just in terms of the way that you've ranked it, you know, this is where it sits. But it was interesting where you said training once or twice per week is enough. But, you know, obviously, and I'm a kind of believer in this, that the bro split, training once per week, isn't really enough. Or maybe it's enough, but it could be better. So I was interested to hear, you know, why you said potentially once is enough throughout the week.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the data, training more often than that is better. But the percentage difference is quite small. It's like, I don't know, I think in one study it's like 6% better or something like that. Now, for a lot of people, that's worth just splitting up your workouts. And I think for a lot of people these days, it's probably more enjoyable. I mean, I'm personally not that inclined to go in and do like one massive day on a body part. I'd rather split up the volume and have my performance be better on that, and it just feels mentally easier. But I also think that, like, people discount that stuff way too fast. And the reason I kind of put training frequency in low importance as a bit of rage bait, because the question
I'm rage baited.
Probably, I got him. The question I get the most, it seems, or one of the biggest questions I get is about training splits, and I honestly think it matters so much less than all the other stuff we've spoken about. If you're covering off the rest of the stuff we've spoken about, the training split just doesn't matter that much. And it also can be as simple as just spread out your training volume so that you can perform well. Like, there's no magic training split. There's no like push-pull legs is better than upper-lower or anything like that. It is 100% dependent on just splitting it up so that you can perform well on each set. That's it. And so it fits in your schedule. That's it. Which means that literally any training split could work, you know, like equally well. So I get really frustrated because people get so hung up on like what training split they should use, and I really don't think it matters that much.
It's such a cool question. I get it too. Like, even, sorry to jump in, but like a week ago, someone shouted out the window of their car, like, "What's your split, bro?" Like, as a joke. But like, I thought it was really funny. Good. But like, it just goes to show like what people are thinking. Like, they really do think it's like, yeah, man, you got to do like PPL or else you're just wasting your time.
Yeah. Well, it's today's version of like, oh, how much you bench, bro? It's like, well, it doesn't really matter. But
and the split doesn't matter
but
too.
I think also it's come back into the sort of public mind because of some of the people out there saying that you should do very low set volume per session, and that getting as many, you know, fresh first sets as possible throughout the week is the best way to go. And therefore, if you were only even doing 5 sets per week, you should split that over like 3 to 5 days, which to me is ridiculous.
So one set a day. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But there are people out there who are like really advocating for it because they're like, well, a fresh set is your most stimulative. Therefore,
and then it drops off, and then every set gets
Therefore, you should have as many fresh sets as possible. You know, and there's some logic to that, because if you get up to a certain, like, you're going to get fatigued at some point, and your performance is going to drop off a cliff. But that threshold is like much higher than 1 to 2 sets in a session. So I think that's kind of emerged from that, and I'm starting to get more questions around that. And you know, generally speaking, at a reasonable volume level, splitting your training over like 2 days, like for the volume for each muscle group over 2 days in a week is going to fit like probably 90% of cases. If you're doing much higher volume, you may need a third day. If you have a particular preference, you may want a third day. If you do low to moderate volume, you can get away with a bro split, no problem. It might be like marginally better to do it on 2 days, but like probably not worth worrying about if a bro split fits your preference or your schedule better. That's basically what it comes down to in my head.
Yeah, I think people just love to latch onto a label because it's so much easier to... They go, oh, that's it. Because in the real world, no one's really going to sit down and go, okay, what muscle groups do I want to grow? How much sets should I allocate to them? Like, it's a 5-minute exercise. Like, it really doesn't take long, but it's kind of just like how people don't want to sit down and budget. They don't want to go, oh, okay, I'm spending this much, where that's a 5-minute exercise too, potentially. And then they can get much better gains just from looking at that. The financial gains will be massive, just like the physical gains will be massive if they sit down and go, okay, well, how many sets am I actually doing of chest? Okay, let's divvy that up. So I guess, like, I know you said you don't prefer splits, but like, what do you usually find yourself kind of like falling into? Because like, for example, some things that I program quite often, and they aren't very conventional. Like some are just, okay, you're training 4 days, upper, lower kind of makes sense, right? Yep. But like, for example, a client comes to mind because I spent all day writing programs today for people that kick off on Monday. I train a guy that trains 4 days per week, but he wants more of a slight focus on upper body. So he has like a upper, lower, upper full body workout. Like, that's not a cool label. Like, what do you call that?
Yeah, totally, totally.
To upper, lower, full body, because on that full body day, we're doing legs too, but we're also getting in some of that extra volume of lateral raises and arms because he wants it's summer over in Canada and he wants to get his guns out. So, like, what have you found yourself kind of like writing, not to give people labels of like, oh yes, it's push-pull legs, but like, are there some things that you commonly write?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like, if someone's training 3 days a week, generally speaking, they're going to be kind of like full body days for me. Like, most of the time, their volume's just going to fall that way. So we just kind of do 3 full body. If it's 4 days a week, then I agree. Upper, lower makes a ton of sense. It generally fits people pretty well. If they want equal volume on most of their muscle groups, then like, sweet. That's just a really nice, easy default to go to. So I do fall into those as well. What I would say to people is like, if you just want a default to kind of just get stuff down on paper, that's going to kind of make sense, then definitely just go for those where it's like upper, lower or push-pull legs or whatever. But then look at the program that you have on paper and just kind of mentally walk through it and go, oh, actually, this upper body day, like I actually need to do a lot more upper body work than lower body work. As an example, I run into this quite a lot. If you do a lower body day and someone just kind of wants to do like a reasonable amount of volume to get their lower body going, it's like you can do a few sets of squats, a few sets of some sort of hinge, and then a bit of like extra isolations, and like that's done. But for upper body, there's like vertical pushing and pulling, there's horizontal pushing and pulling, there's isolated stuff on your shoulders, on your arms. Like there's a lot more that can be fit in. So sometimes the upper body days end up being much longer than the lower body days. And you might just look at that and go, oh, cool. Well, okay, if I just like drag over some lateral raises to my lower body day, as you just mentioned, then the days end up being similarly long and it's actually more convenient for me. And then, okay, that's a lower body day with some random upper body stuff thrown on it. And mentally we kind of go, no, it's supposed to be lower body, but it doesn't matter,
It's a full body day. Oh, no.
Yeah. So that's what I would recommend people doing. And like I do that quite a lot where, as you say, a client I just wrote for a client as well. She wants to improve her back. So we have a lot more back volume, but how are we going to split that out over the week? Well, I'm going to be putting some back stuff on her leg days or whatever, like it's just how it's going to work out to fit the volume in a reasonable way.
Yeah, it's just thinking a bit more outside the box. And for us, obviously, it's not really thinking outside the box, but for people that just have ideas of just certain workouts that they have to do, it does feel weird at first, doing like, you know, I have a lady as well that's training 3 times a week, and, you know, on one of her lower days, she's doing rows and lateral raises before she leaves the gym. It's just like a couple of sets, but it's more so just like a top up of volume that's not enough to be like, oh man, I just trained legs, I'm like too sore. It's just enough to be like, all right, that ticks a box. I'm not going to be that sore from it. It's only 2 sets each, and then that adds to the total volume over the week. You also mentioned tempo. And how it doesn't really matter for building muscle, and I'm curious to see what your opinion is on like when it does matter, or when you do actually step in and program tempo, because for a very long time people were, you know, of the understanding of like slow and controlled, like very, you know, 4 seconds down or 5 seconds down, 3 seconds down, you're going to get more muscle damage, so you're going to build more muscle. But the research is telling us that that's not really true.
Yeah, I mean, every study that has looked at tempo basically says that no matter how, well, not no matter how fast, like you still have to actually keep control of the weight when you're coming down. That's the only caveat in this entire discussion. But like whether you go slow up and slow down, fast up, slow down, any of that stuff, the tempo just doesn't really seem to make a difference with muscle growth. The only real study that comes to mind, like I just mentioned, is there was a study where they kind of had them do bicep curls and they lift it up and then just like let it drop down without resisting it at all on the way down, and that resulted in less muscle growth. But you're doing less physical work that way, so it makes sense. But as long as you have a reasonable level of control coming down, then it's all sweet. Tempo for me, therefore, is not that important, but it is an area where if you wanted to get into the weeds, it can actually make a really big difference to how you train, because it can change the resistance profile of an exercise. So we often talk about how, there's a machine that has a certain resistance profile. Is it harder or an exercise, is it harder in the shortened position or the lengthened position? So if people aren't really familiar with this idea, a good demonstration of this is like a dumbbell lateral raise. It's super, super easy at the bottom, but as you come up to the top, it gets a lot harder. So the resistance profile is like an ascending resistance profile. It gets really hard at the top. Other exercises are harder when the muscle is in the lengthened position. Others are hardest in the middle of the rep, like a standard bicep curl, for example. But your tempo and your momentum can actually alter where the exercise is hardest. If you think about, if you were to, from the bottom of a dumbbell lateral raise, if you were to swing it up as hard as you could, it's going to change that resistance profile. If you were to lift it up slowly from the bottom, it makes that resistance profile even steeper. It makes it even harder when you get to the top because you don't have the momentum carrying you through from the bottom. So it is actually something that you can sort of intentionally alter if you wanted to get really fancy with resistance profiles and stuff. Now, that's not something that I think 99% of people should be worrying about.
I do
like
an explosive lateral raise, though.
But I do want to throw it in there because, like, as you said before, with this length and partial stuff, and thinking about, well, I personally think that we should be probably trying to stimulate every muscle in every position over time if we can. There's an opportunity where you don't necessarily have to use different machines or different variations of exercises. You could have the variation be a different tempo on the same exercise and therefore vary if it's harder in the shortened or the mid position or something like that. So I think that is a potential application for it. I mean, other places that I would potentially use like tempo and stuff like that is with skill acquisition and motor learning for people who are unfamiliar with an exercise. Doing something with a slower controlled tempo there makes a lot more sense because when you move slowly, you actually get continuous feedback as to where your joints are in space and that kind of thing. And I've done this before, even with more advanced people who are, say, struggling with their positioning under a heavy squat. I make them do super slow squats because at every point throughout the range of motion, you're actually feeling where your position is. You're getting feedback because you're shaking and wobbling back and forth, and it helps them better get a sense of where their positioning is. So you do get a bit of, proprioceptive feedback by doing that. The other thing you could use tempo for is to perform mechanical drop sets. So it kind of ties back into what I was saying about the resistance profile. You can basically take a single set and like extend your repetitions once fatigue sets in. So you might start, say, a set of leg extensions with a really slow, controlled tempo. You squeeze hard at the top where the exercise provides the most resistance. You're biasing that shortened position. And then as you fatigue and you can no longer reach the top, you might switch to an explosive or an accelerating tempo. So then you're still getting the stimulus, you're still able to complete more reps, but you're using that momentum from the bottom to get to the top. So you could actually use a little mechanical drop set that way too. So, I mean, there are some nuanced ways you can use it, but generally speaking, it's like as long as you are getting some stimulus on the muscle and like controlling the load to a certain degree, it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah. I like what you said about the slow tempos, and that's what I would use it to do as well. For basically like to try and strive for technical excellence, or if they hit a plateau, or if they're new to an exercise, I find it really good. I also really enjoy pauses, so I think that still comes under tempo.
Sure.
Especially if I first take on someone that I haven't trained yet, but they have some understanding of training, and they've had maybe a PT before, or they're very into their training. And then I'll get videos of them, like, before we start working together, I like to get videos of them moving so I can see what their body is, kind of like a virtual, pre-screening. And I'm like, oh no. You know what I mean? Like, that squat that you've learned over time is not the best squat. So, I might break it down to a front foot elevated dumbbell split squat, take squats out because I feel like, they need to earn their squat back, or, get into better habits and increase their ankle mobility, etc. But often I'll program a pause first so that they can try to get comfortable in that position. They can also get used to trying to extend their knee over their toes. And then for that next program, they'll still do the front foot elevated dumbbell split squat, but now there's no pause. So now they can kind of get a bit more flow with it, and then we can look at potentially introducing the squat pattern. So I'm a big fan of that too. And the only problem with that is it's not sexy to receive as a client, especially when you see like a program not move. And obviously it depends on the understanding of the client. And obviously as a coach, you have to explain what you're doing, but it's not sexy. If you see the same exercise and it's just a different tempo, you go, oh man, it was 3 seconds down, 2 second pause, and now it's just 3 seconds down and 1 second up. But I find that's where tempo is handy as well. The next post that I wanted to jump into, man, that took a while. I didn't think it was going to take that long, but I appreciate your level of level of knowledge. I'm like looking at all this stuff, I'm like, whoa, man, I'm not sure if we'll get through all of it.
Yeah.
You mentioned a post, add cardio without losing gains, right? So
yeah,
this is obviously a very hot topic. How do you? First of all, can you explain the interference effect, and also kind of explain how you navigate around it if you do want to get some sort of cardio workout in and still lift weights? And this is very common with the whole, everyone trying to be a hybrid athlete these days. They think they should be lifting and running and lifting and doing a high rocks. So yeah, I'd love to crack this open.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, fundamentally what's happening when you're doing endurance-based training, you're sending a signal for adaptation that is endurance-based, and when you're doing something to grow the muscle, it's kind of or strength, it's kind of molecularly the opposite signal. So you kind of don't want to send those signals too big at the same time, is kind of the fundamental of it. Like, I don't want to talk about the actual cellular machinery that we're trying to target and all that stuff, because it just kind of doesn't matter. Like, that's the crux of it. So if you've just run for an hour and then you go and try and lift, firstly, you're going to be too tired to lift properly and get a good stimulus. But secondly, you're kind of telling your body two things at once. And so your adaptations from each of those things are not going to be as great as if those two things were separated in time. And that's the crux of it. Now, it does come down to how much volume are you doing and how hard are the workouts. As an example, I've had people come to me before and be a bit scared of doing like 10 minutes of cardio as a warm-up for their lifting, because they're like, oh, I heard you should separate cardio and lifting. I don't want to be too tired for my workout. I don't want to dampen my hypertrophy gains. And the reality is, like, that volume of running is just way too small to actually make a meaningful difference. So you're totally sweet. You're fine to do that. But the general rule is like a fine way to do things is to ideally lift first and then do your cardio, because then you're not too tired to, lift something hard and heavy and to keep good form. A slightly better way of doing things is to separate your cardio and lifting a little bit, so they might have a couple of hours between them. And maybe a slightly better way again is to do them on like separate days, or like literally the opposite end of the same day. Because you're separating those signals by time, so your body has time to adapt to one signal before it gets a different signal. That's kind of the crux of it, and that's what the interference effect is. But again, I think it's pretty overblown. So most people who might be running and lifting more or less recreationally, or even in my case, like I'm a pretty serious lifter and I'm a very casual runner, putting those two things together is not going to be a big deal for me, because the amount of running I do is not that high, and the sort of signal that I create is not that high from running, because it's literally just like jogging around a little bit. So that's kind of the crux of it. So I would always encourage someone to like get some more cardio in, because I actually think it's firstly underrated for your physical health, it's underrated for your mental health. It gives us something that lifting doesn't give, but it actually improves your lifting, because your ability to recover within a session and in between sessions is improved when you have cardio. There's even evidence that cardio can improve your ability to grow muscle in the long term, because let's say you do a ton of cycling. What's happening as part of the cardio adaptations is that you're growing more capillaries around the muscles. And if you have more capillaries around the muscles, you can potentially perfuse more oxygen around there. You can gain more satellite cells, and satellite cells kind of predict your long-term ability to grow muscle. And that means that potentially if your cardio adaptations are better in your legs, you can grow bigger legs longer term. So I think it's worth putting in for a variety of reasons if you can fit it in. I have had pushback sometimes with people saying, like, I don't have that long to fit, like I'm already lifting 4 or 5 times a week, how am I going to fit in more cardio? And my solution to that is that you don't have to do cardio in one continuous stretch to get the benefit of it. So that example I used before of doing 10 minutes of cardio before you lift as a warm-up, that counts. So if you're able to do that before your 4 lifting sessions a week, you've just done 40 minutes of cardio. It's the same as going for a 40-minute run in one go, but you split it up into really manageable chunks and you're getting some of the benefit from it there. So that's how I like to do it.
Yeah, I definitely understand the interference effect. So like I mentioned before, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And there was a few times when I first started, I was trying to figure out, how does this work within my lifting and my jiu-jitsu training? I'm not trying to be a world champion Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athlete. Although in my head, I like to think I am. Because we all do, if you're competitive and you get on the mats, you're like, I don't care what I was doing in the past life, right now, I am a world champion. And
then a 45 kilo old lady who's got a purple belt just like destroys you.
Yeah, basically. But like I tried to lift after doing jiu-jitsu, and man, that was shocking. I was lifting like 50% under my potential, and I was just gassed. Even if I had a few hours in between, like I did jiu-jitsu at lunchtime, let's say, and tried to lift at 6, I was just gassed. So what I've actually done, because I don't care about jiu-jitsu as much as I do about lifting, because it's just like hobby, and for training I obviously I love both, but anyway, I actually lift right before lifting. I lift right before Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because number one, it's like I'm fresh for the lifting session, so I can lift more weight, I can really smash it. But then secondly, I actually use that fatigue to go into training to be more tired, to almost make most of the interference effect,
Gotcha.
to disadvantage my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, to obviously make me better at Jiu-Jitsu because I'm more tired than everyone. And then
makes sense.
And also I'm warm, so I don't have to warm up. Or like I don't have to, like I'm not stiff or have to worry about my lower back or this and that. So I do find it interesting around the interference effect and how to manage it. Because it really does impact you if you do gas yourself before lifting. And that's not just jiu-jitsu, it's also, going for runs or doing things like that. I guess it's just more so the management of time. Like you're saying, the 10 minutes before is a great start, but it also kind of feels like on a personal level, kind of doing that, it does feel like you're not doing enough.
Yep.
Like it's just a 10-minute workout. But I guess
I can understand that. It's a little bit like what we were speaking before about the training split, where like any physical quality, essentially what we're trying to do, it's a bit like calories as well. It's like your weekly allocation of volume or calories or whatever is really what determines the outcome. So if you start to think about it more on that level, then I think it helps quite a lot mentally. So in my head, I'm just a little bit like, well, I'm just trying to accumulate X number of minutes of cardio this week. it could be the same with stretching as well, even. I need X number of minutes in this position to make a physical change in my range of motion. So that helps me quite a lot mentally. And I think, when we're talking about training split, about how, like, let's say you had to do a massive leg day and you're trying to fit 20 sets of legs into one day, that seems impossible for a lot of people. But if you split it over 2 or 3 days, it's like, oh yeah, I can do that. It was the same with the cardio. If trying to face a 45-minute run is like, no way I'm up to that yet, you could break it up as much as you need to, and I think that makes a really big difference mentally when you start viewing it on a sort of more of a weekly thing.
Yeah, I like that perspective. You also mentioned on Instagram, and you talked about it recently on your stories, I think, is, not specifically this, but you've been talking about programming. But you mentioned you write every program twice.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to explain that.
Yeah, I think I touched on it a little bit as well with the split. Is like, everybody has a ton of stuff that they want to put in their program. And it's like, oh, I'd like to do that exercise. I think this is fun, whatever. And maybe a few people are also, I see a lot of this where people are like a bit scared to, like, oh, I hope I'm doing enough volume. So they just kind of like, I'll do an extra set just in case kind of thing. So for me, kind of writing down your ideal training week of what you would really love to do if you had no limitations is a really handy way of just putting everything out on a spreadsheet or something where you can drag and drop and move things around if you need to. So you can just see everything, and then you can start to allocate it, So if I say, well, I love these 4 chest exercises and I want to do 4 sets each on them, and then I actually look at my training week and I need to do that on like every muscle group, oh shit, these are really long sessions. I'm not going to have the time or the physical capacity to even get through all of this. Okay, well now I can start to cut down on the stuff that is like the lowest priority for me. And I start to prune and prioritize for this specific training phase. What am I trying to do? And you move stuff around. So the second pass is just like taking into account all the constraints that you have. So I do that a lot with clients because I tend to have a lot of ideas of what we can fit in, and they might have a lot of requests when they have an intake form for me of like, this is all the stuff I'd love to get better at. And realistically, as a coach, I have to go like, hey, well, this phase is for this, and this is what we're going to focus on more because that's what fits logistically. You can do the opposite way as well, actually, which works quite well, where you go, what is the absolute bare minimum I need to make progress? And you put that down, which will look very bare. And then you can go, for everything that I add, how do I justify this? Does this have a logical reason for being here? Can I really justify it being here? And for some people, mentally, that's a bit easier as well. And that way you kind of do the opposite process, but it's still, you're kind of writing the program twice that way.
Yeah, I like that. I was instantly seeing kind of like 2 rooms where the record label sits and the musicians sit. And like the musicians just go crazy and write all the songs. Yeah. And then they go to the label and go, all right, put the album together, and then that reduces it down to what is going to work. And then the other way around too, where the label might say, all right, we got 4 songs or 6 songs for an EP. Now go nuts and create it. It's kind of like the creative process and then the kind of pruning process. I like that
Definitely.
idea. That's why I kind of wanted you to rattle that out, because it's important, because I think not enough people are thinking about it. And even, mate, I've seen the worst, like you probably have in gyms. Even some personal trainers, mate, they're walking around no program. There was only about a handful of clients when I was as a personal trainer that were walking around with iPads with programs and stuff, and I was like, what are you actually doing? They were classically just looking around going, that's free.
That's like, free, let's do it. Yeah,
it's comical. Or just saving a space in the gym, getting all this equipment together and running the same exact client.
Everyone has the same program today. Yeah, dude. Oh my God.
Man, when I first got into it, I was like, it's
eye-opening.
Your clients can see that they are walking in and the other client's walking out and they're doing the same thing. Like, this lady's 40 and overweight. This guy's 50 and wants to build muscle. They're doing the same. Anyway.
Yeah.
Mate,
hopefully they never talk to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Even the coaches should be writing their programs twice. I did want to talk about your thoughts because about protein, because most fitness influencers, I would say, are preaching the 1.6 is enough. So if you're not aware of the debate, it's 1.6 grams of protein per kilo of body weight is enough. We don't need to go higher. That's the ceiling. Any more than that is potentially just a waste of time. And I'm obviously interested in this because protein is a massive part of what we do, and people already don't eat enough. And you know, I'm in. I subscribe to Alan Aragon's Research Review and you know, quite a few other ones, and I love diving into it. And I just feel like, and I've never really posted about it, but I feel like it could be more. And for me, and maybe for you, it should be more. And people that take shit a bit more seriously in the gym. How much protein do you think we really need? And if it is for this person or that person, you know, dive into who for. But personally, I guess my stance is I think 1.6 is a great start and a good place for people to begin. But it really depends on who the person is and what their goal is.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like 1.6 as well, and then push it a bit higher for people who are like training very hard, very serious, that kind of thing. There's a couple of thoughts I have around it because there are debates about like how we're measuring muscle protein synthesis in the studies. You know, so the studies that are recommending, oh, you don't need more than 1.4. There's questions around like, well, you know, is the measurement really showing us what we think it's showing? This kind of thing. And I think some of the more recent studies have maybe said, oh, actually looking back at these studies, maybe they were undershooting a little bit because they didn't measure it quite the right way. I've seen some comments saying like, well, a lot of people are so focused on muscle protein synthesis, but what about all the other lean tissue in the body, like your organs and your bones and your collagen and all of that stuff? We might need a little bit more protein to optimize that as well. So I think that all kind of says that perhaps a little bit higher is useful. Something that I often see, though, as a bit of a problem is that people seem to not consider protein from every source of food in their diet. So sometimes when you're telling someone, look, you should be eating 1.6 or maybe even as much as 2 grams per kilo, they're going, oh, that's so much chicken breast, or like, I don't want to take protein shakes or whatever. But they're not counting the protein from their rice, from their oats, from the seeds they put in their muesli, like all of this stuff, which to me is like, that all counts. But for some reason, because it's a plant food and it's not a quote-unquote protein food, it's not the protein archetype that we think of, they feel like it doesn't count. Source. Yeah, so sometimes it feels a bit like, you know, we want to keep the bar realistic for your average person who's training, and just tell someone, you know, you need 2.5 grams per kilo for someone who is serious about their training, but is maybe just like, mate, I just don't want to have that much protein every day.
It's a lot.
You can say, well, look, 1.6, you're still going to get awesome results. At the same time, maybe it's not as hard to hit 1.6 or 2.0 as you thought, because you already eat all of these foods that you enjoy, and they actually have, you know, like if you have 40 grams of oats, it's got like 4 grams of protein in it or something, and that adds up, you know. So I understand the argument for eating a bit more, and I understand the argument for erring a little bit higher. I think that makes a lot of sense. I guess I'm not 100% sure like what the threshold is, but it's probably again contextual as to how much muscle mass are you actually carrying on your frame. I'm not convinced that, like, you know, I'm over 90 kilos with quite a lot of muscle versus, you know, a woman who is just as serious about her training but is maybe 50 kilos and doesn't have as much lean mass as I do. Does she still, like, I know the prescriptions are relative to body mass, but still I'm not sure that those would be the same for each of us, and I don't think it's clear in the literature either. So I think there is a little bit of individual context to think about there. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it. Where 1.6, I agree, is pretty good. If people can get a bit higher, then I tend to say, look, probably safe to go a bit higher. You might get a little bit more out of it. I mean, it's definitely safe, but you'll probably get little bit more out of it, just to kind of give you a bit of a safety margin in terms of your gains, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a lot too, like shooting a bit higher just so that you can fall on something that's more realistic.
Yeah.
If you like, you know, if you don't hit 2, you fall on 1.8, 1.6, you know, it's still a very nice place to land. And I think for the most part, you know, the 1.6 is a great place to start, but I guess I just don't like the absolutism that it's said with, and the authority that it's like, no, don't worry, just 1.6 and you're fine. You know, that's I think that's never a good story. One more question, then we'll jump into the last 3. What do you think the fitness industry is currently talking too much about?
Well, I think probably what I see and what comes to me is a certain corner of the fitness industry. But some of the stuff I was talking about before about the extremely high frequency to get as many fresh sets as possible, stuff like, using very low training volume. Like, I am an advocate of starting with low volume and building it up over time because I think that it's easier to make progress that way. It's easier to make sure that every set gets maximum effort that way. It's easier logistically. But I still think that doing like moderate to high volume is going to get you better gains than doing very low volume. That sort of stuff is what I see a lot of. And all of that is kind of based on theory crafting. It's looking at potential mechanisms and then just expanding the logical argument out to try and come up with some sort of practical solution. And those things are important to do. The sort of thought experiments and the mechanistic stuff is important to think about. But it is not enough to prescribe what you should be doing in the gym. It doesn't have the evidence. And in fact, a lot of those things have logical holes. And it is coming from some specific individuals in the industry. And it's coming a lot on TikTok as well with like younger lifters who are maybe trying to find, the next thing for the next generation of lifters. Like how are we going to move on from what's already established? How are we going to make this even better? So I can kind of really relate to that idea of trying to improve and optimize. But unfortunately, I think a lot of it is just like not based on a lot of evidence. So that's a trend that I see a lot of in the industry now. And I'm certainly not saying just fall back on what works and, just train hard, bro, and don't worry about it. But there is an element of that. There's other stuff that's always trendy. Like you said, the Hyrox thing and the hybrid training. I'm kind of a fan of that. I think if people are having fun with it, then it's good. But you do have to just be clear on what your goals are. Like if your goals are to grow as much muscle as possible, then that's probably not the best approach, but maybe you need to rethink if growing as much muscle as possible is even really what you care about in the long run. But I would definitely say that like that sort of mechanistic theory crafting kind of approach is a big thing that I'm seeing at the moment, and I don't really like it.
I think it's really attractive for people to buy into as well because it sounds easier than doing high volume, where a lot of the research is saying that generally higher volumes will lend better towards hypertrophy. And then obviously there was Mike Mensa, where people are like, well, he did low volume, he was super jacked.
Do you know what annoys me about that? Why do they always single out Mike Mensa and not every other pro bodybuilder that did high volume?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, Mike Mensa looked great on lower volume, but like literally every other Mr. Olympia trained with high volume. I don't understand it.
And was like super jacked.
Yeah.
It's cherry picking, like you're saying. Like you're getting at. It's easier to bite into. It's less work. Well, you have to train harder, but ultimately you have to do less. So I think that's where a lot of the buy into. And I actually found myself, I've got a couple of kids that I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, but when they were really young, you struggle to train. You struggle with a lot of things, but, training and sleep are two really big ones. And I was like, yeah, maybe this low volume thing's good. But it was literally just because I had no time and it fit my life. And now, like, it's a bit less like that and I can kind of train a little bit more now. I'm like, mate, I'm not high volume because it's still very hard to manage training and sleep and stuff like that. But it's definitely better for me. Not everyone's the same. Everyone has different recoverability, etc. But I do find that in general, what the research is saying does kind of suit what or does what it says.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree. And like I say, I think there is sometimes a tipping point where when you go too high with volume, then people's per set effort starts to drop, and then they sort of counterintuitively actually get worse results. So there's definitely a point, but it's different for everybody. So,
yeah, for sure. All right, man. So I like to end the podcast with 3 self-development questions. A quote that has made your life better, a book that has made your life better, and a habit or a daily habit that has made your life better or does make your life better that you currently do.
All right, cool. Well, a quote, probably one of my favorite quotes is from the Icelandic strongman, Jon Paul Sigmarsson, who, when he was doing an axle deadlift, like 600 pounds or whatever, lifted it up and screamed out, there is no reason to be alive if you can't do deadlift. And you could just see he's doing that because he's freaking passionate about it. He loves it. And it kind of reinforces to me that there might be something optimal to do in the gym, but if there's something you enjoy doing more, fuck, why not? If there's some weird exercises you just like, just do it, man. Like, have fun with it and enjoy it. That's really what the training is about. If I'm not enjoying my training, I kind of think, well, what's the point of me doing this? So that's my quote. And you should look it up because he's like this giant guy and his voice kind of breaks a little bit when he does it. It's pretty funny.
Yeah. Sorry, just on that. Like, I think that's one thing, and it's obvious, but like that's one thing that the science misses, like with science-backed training and the whole evidence-based movement is, I'm all for it and I'm all for volume 2 and stuff, but it is about having fun at the end of the day. And actually, I was recording a YouTube video before this, and I was talking about like mistakes I made when I was young, and some actually good things that I did when I was young. And like one of the good things that I did was I was a rugby kid growing up. I'm from New Zealand, so I played rugby, and like I had a mate, and like I thought he was jacked. And I was like, mate, what do you do? He's like, I just do push-ups at home. Like, we're like 11 and 12, right? So when we would hang out, we'd do push-ups. And then he taught me diamond push-ups. We're like, we'll put our nose in the diamond, we're doing the diamonds. We'll check out our triceps. And then we're like elevating our feet. And then he's like, like I've got a bench press out in the garage. So then we'd hang out, we'd play Nitro Kart on the PS1, and then we'd do some bench press. Yeah. And I was like, so like that was a level. And then when we went to high school, I went to Christchurch Boys High School, a lot of All Blacks, very sport heavy. And I got a gym membership there when I was 14 and I started training there. And me and my mates would just lift at lunchtime. If we weren't playing touch rugby or playing bull rush or, doing something stupid like that, we were in the gym and it was fun. We were lifting, we were laughing, we were just hanging out. And that's actually like, when I look back at it now, and also when I was a face-to-face PT and like, it's like 9 or 10 when no one's in the gym and you're training with the other PTs, it's like fun. Those are kind of like the golden days of lifting that I really miss. And it's that fun element that is so important that actually kind of cemented me into it. And you can see a lot of people that don't stick to lifting because it isn't fun. There isn't that element of your mates being around or you like smiling and laughing or, having this great time. And, now I lift here at this gym that I've created and I lift on my own. And now I even pay for a gym membership just to be around other people because like, I'm like, I don't really enjoy it. Like I train here because it's easier. And, I can film my sets and I don't have to bother people because I don't like filming in public gyms because I can tell people feel awkward. But anyway, I'll walk down the street and pay an extra, whatever it is a month just to be around people, to have that vibe. I'm not even talking to them. But it does feel more fun to me. So, sorry, that's a bit of a rant, but I think that fun is like so underrated. And obviously,
I agree.
I'm lucky to enjoy lifting because not everyone does. But it's if you can find it in some sort of resistance training or physical activity, I think that really unlocks something for you. Yeah,
I mean, totally agree. Like you forget that a lot of people who are in shape just because they happened to be like decent at sport. They happened to like the gym. And I just think about a lot of clients who they're hiring a PT. They're doing it because they don't want to come by themselves. They fucking hate going to the gym. They need someone to help them get there and do it. So we've got to always consider that as well.
Yeah. A book.
4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. So it's all about basically the average human lifespan is 4,000 weeks. And this is from a guy who used to write a productivity column for one of the major newspapers in the UK. And I mean, long story short, he kind of discovered that you end up in this like endless quest to try and optimize your productivity and you never kind of quite get there. So it was quite impactful for me. It's got quite a lot of good ways of thinking about things and I suppose methods to just help you enjoy your life a little bit. So I really like his books and I think his emails are fantastic as well. So worth getting on his email list. He only emails like every month or something, but they're always really good. So Oliver Burkeman, 4,000 Weeks is a big one for me.
Man, that's good perspective, 4,000 weeks, It puts a real finiteness to...
that's literally the way to use is finiteness. And like you have finite time, energy, effort, and I think the key thing was like there's a lot of things that are worth doing. So like me personally, I'm interested in so many different things. I like gaming, I like music, I like training, I read a lot. I'm in Sweden, I'm trying to learn a new language, like all of this stuff. There's so many things that are worth my attention, and unfortunately I can't fit all of them in. So you do have to make a choice, and you have to kind of go like, you know what, I'm never going to be a good enough guitarist to stand up on stage and play a gig maybe, but like it's still something I can just enjoy for 10 minutes a day, and it doesn't have to be more than that. Things like that. It's really good, like mindset shift kind of thing. Yeah,
mate, I'm the same. Like, I actually studied jazz guitar.
Oh, did you? Cool.
Back in New Zealand, yeah. So I play guitar and I sing as well. I used to gig.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So yeah, that was actually my past life from basically like 21 to from like 18 to 21. I was a full-time muso.
Oh wow, cool.
But yeah, I love animals too. Like I used to have a like tropical freshwater tank with African cichlids, and it was like I was so into it. Like I had to get rid of it because I had children. Like
yeah.
I was like it started off with like 4 fish, and then it was like 8, and then you get all these different filtration systems, and then they started breeding, and I wasn't trying to breed it, and then I had to buy this incubator that kept all the eggs alive, and I was like my wife was like I love that you love this, but man, we're gonna have kids soon, so like get rid of it, because like I had to, because I was obsessing about it, like
got to keep the kids alive before you keep all the other stuff.
like we need 10 other different lives to live the hobbies and the passions. A daily habit, or just a habit. It doesn't have to be daily, but just something you do.
Oh, definitely. So where I live here in Sweden, we've got a little sort of foresty bit next to us, and just walking through there because I work from home, especially like breaking up the day, walking through there. But the key for me is doing it without any external stimulus, because I think, a lot of people, when they go to bed at night, like their mind is just turning over, and a lot of people go like, oh, that's where I get all my ideas, that's where I think of stuff I got to do and all of that. And I think it's happening because your brain doesn't get any quiet time throughout the day. It's just constant stimulus. And even when you're taking your time off to go for your walk, or you're training at the gym, we've got music, we've got a podcast, whatever, it's still stimulus. And I think that having some time every day just to have zero stimulus and have a bit of brain sort of idling time has been such a big game changer for me, especially because I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, or, maybe you and I, like we're sort of analytical and we want to learn more, and it's exciting to like throw on a training podcast and learn more, but sometimes you just need a break from that, So for me, that's a daily habit that I've implemented, and it makes a really big difference. But I mean, still listen to Brock's podcast, but
yeah. No, for sure. No, it's funny. I started this year basically anti-podcast. I was like, I need to stop. Because also sometimes I'm retaining knowledge that I don't even need.
Yeah.
Or I'm just like listening to it to be entertained, where I really could just sit with my thoughts so that I don't wake up at 2 a.m. and open the laptop and start doing stuff because I've had this idea, or I'm like catastrophizing my life, like, oh, we're gonna go broke. Oh, look at you, like Sydney. Oh, Albert's going crazy,
for sure.
Yeah, like there's so many things to think about, but the problem is like that. It's hard to say that to people because there's no real benefit to it. Like the benefits that you're talking about are legit, and I've experienced it too. But it's not as easy to grasp onto as like, oh, I listened to a podcast and now I have this fact, or I learned this thing.
These are the 3 takeaways or whatever.
Exactly. But I completely agree with you. It's so ironic that like back in the day, that's what a lot of people did. And I was reminded of this when my dad came over last year. Like I actually trained with him. I did an Instagram post about this, but like I trained with him, and he started lifting really late in life, like after his 60s. And before that, he was not training at all. He's a truck driver, so you can imagine the life, very pub heavy, mates, this type of stuff. Very into sport, but more so watching sport than playing sport. And even though he does play softball and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, like he was training and I was training him, and he just went for it. No fancy outfit, no cool shoes, no podcasts, no blasting music. He was just like, son, tell me what to do. All right, Dad, do that. Put your feet there, push. And like, I'll be like, all right, Dad, that's 15 reps. He's like, I've got more. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, this is the truck driver mindset. Like, this is what we need. Yeah. We need like more of this. Like, he's not connected to anything really. Like, no podcasts, no YouTube channels. know anything like that. And I think that was just so refreshing to see, because he was, I don't know, like so disconnected, but also so connected at the same time, like to himself and to what he wanted to do. And I feel like we're so lost in other people's lives, sometimes we forget to live our own.
I agree. I mean, I don't really watch movies or anything anymore, and like things like that. And so when people are talking about, this actor and that actor, I'm like, I have no idea who that is. And honestly, I don't care. Whereas before I would have been like, oh, I'm kind of like, I don't know what's going on in the world. And now I'm just like, dude, who cares? And my life's better for it, So yeah, there's definitely something to that. And you got to think, like, that's how your brain evolved, right? It wasn't supposed to be occupied with stuff all the time. So
yeah, we were just meant to lay on our back and look at the stars.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Luke, for coming on, mate. I really enjoy your knowledge, your expertise. Like I said, I've been following you for a while. I think either Glenn Carroll or Coach Mark Carroll mentioned you or talked about you once, and I was like, I've been following you for a while. So it's been awesome to have you on the podcast, mate. I really love what you say, and how you think, and how you act as a coach. And your Instagram posts, your content is really cool. How can people keep up with you? Obviously, we talked about your Instagram, so please say that. But do you want to send people anywhere?
I really appreciate that, mate. It's nice to say, and I've had a good time on the podcast too. My Instagram is @_Luke Tulloch, and I usually have some sort of freebie, like free programs or whatever, that you can sign up to from there, so that you'll get on my email list then too, which I go a little bit deeper into stuff. So that's probably the best place to go.
Awesome, mate. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and yeah, we might have to chop up a few other questions another time.
Yeah, no worries. That sounds good.
Thanks, Luke. Cheers, mate.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.